On the last episode of Menace, the Ken story, Kenny went off. He called Pops every name in the book and told him that he was gonna pay him the money back. Honestly, I think Pops was scared of Kenny, but he played it off under that whole "I'm the parent and you are not gonna disrespect me under my roof" thing. He told Kenny to get out of the house, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Kenny never really had a filter, but if he did, it completely broke at that point. Kenny yelled out, "Nigga, this ain't your roof. This is my granddaddy's roof. My granddaddy worked hard for this roof and everything under it. My granddaddy made a way for this roof, this house, my grandma, my mama, me, my brother, and you. Now some work needs to be done to the roof, and I'm trying to make a way. You done messed that up. You a real nigga for that, Pops. Ain't but 3 people that could put me out of this house, and 2 of them dead. Ma, do I gotta leave?" Ma was just over it. She said, "Y'all cut this mess out," and walked back into her bedroom. Now this is the thing. Kenny knew he didn't have to leave. Pops couldn't make him leave, and Ma wouldn't make him leave. I think he was just over Pops at that point. Kenny looks at Pops right in the face and said, "Forget you, nigga," and I mean that. For the first time, I was in the middle of it. I told Pops that it was Kenny's house too, and he didn't have to leave. Kenny said, "Nah, I'm out." Kenny knew he'd never be homeless. There was always some girl, or Rob always had some spot. He was 18, and that was just the end of the line for him. Kenny threw all of his stuff into trash bags and packed it into his 1991 Honda, and I helped him. And that goes back to the respect thing. I lost so much respect for Pops with that whole situation. It was bad enough that he wasn't helping Mom, but he stole from the only person who was. And when he got caught up in what he obviously did, he pulled the parent card, like he didn't just steal from his son. I was angry after Kenny left. The crazy thing is, I didn't hide it. And even though I made sure that Pops knew I blamed him, he never treated me like he treated Kenny. Not once. And I was disrespectful too. That just made me madder. Kenny didn't go away, of course. He still came to the house to give my money, and he still came to get me on Wednesdays. But it was different. He wasn't there, and I knew he wouldn't be there. Kenny always acted like a visitor when he came over, and that made me mad. True to his word, he was really like, "Forget Pops." He didn't speak to Pops when he came over to the house, and if I ever mentioned anything related to him, Kenny would literally say, "Forget that nigga." Or sometimes, he'd just call him Crackhead Chris. There was really no coming back from it. I was no longer fearful of anything. One thing that I've learned is that fear is about loss. When you fear something, it's because you know you have something to lose. I felt like I had lost everything. And if I didn't have anything else to lose, then I didn't have anything else to fear. Ken. Chapter 6, May 26, 1993. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. May 26, 1993. It was a Wednesday, so of course I skipped school to hang out with Kenny. He picked me up early that morning and we went to eat breakfast at my favorite place. Kenny ordered a Western omelet with extra sausage, 1 waffle, and orange juice. I ordered pancakes, sausage links, hash browns, and orange juice. We joked over breakfast about why Pops had a black eye. Neither of us knew, but we came up with all kinds of stories about how it likely happened. In every story, Pops had either stolen something or said something that somebody didn't like, and they all ended with Kenny saying, "Man, forget Pops." After breakfast, we went to the mall. Going to the mall was an adventure all by itself. We didn't just go there to shop. A big part of going to the mall was just hanging out. By that point in time, I was just as much into girls as Kenny was, and they were into me too. Me and Kenny were at the mall collecting phone numbers like squirrel collects nuts. It was just a game for real. There was no way that either of us could have kept up with that many girls. We just did it because we could. We did it because we were together. I don't know about Kenny, but when I wasn't with him, I ain't even do all that. There was just something about proving the point to him. Kenny taught me everything about girls. He was always breaking something down to me. The conversation that day went like this. We're young, and we have a long time before we need to be thinking about settling down. But this is the trick. Every girl you deal with gotta know their place with you. That's how you keep it from getting messy. If you meet a girl and you only want to sleep with her, don't promise her anything other than that. If that ain't enough for her, let her walk. You can replace her. You ain't got enough energy to treat all of them good. But if you find somebody that's worth it, treat her better than you've ever treated anybody else. You ain't even got to be faithful to her, but make her feel like she's the most important thing to you, and she's gonna return the favor. How you know all of this? I asked. His answer was simple. I messed up a lot. We left the mall and headed to the movies. Menace to Society came out that day, and Kenny wanted to be the first to see it. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but the theater was packed. We got a huge bucket of popcorn to share and 2 sodas. Kenny wouldn't let me get extra butter because he was wearing a crisp white Nautica t-shirt and he didn't want to mess it up. Kenny loved that movie. He had always been a fan of violent movies, but the 90s paired that with edgy urban culture that people like us could identify with. Kenny watched with a huge smile on his face, and I remember thinking, it's crazy how happy this makes him. The movie was almost 2 hours long. We left and went to our dirt path to smoke, and it was nearly 7 o'clock by the time we left. I knew that was the point in time where our day usually came to an end, but I didn't want it to. Kenny was no longer living at the house, so I knew he'd leave right after he dropped me off. I missed him, and I wasn't ready for the day to be over, but it was about that time. We started making our way back to the house. Kenny noticed that we were a little low on gas, so he decided to stop at a store that was about 10 minutes away from the house. I sat in the car while he went inside to pay, fidgeting with the tape player. The Menace to Society soundtrack had also come out that day, and Kenny bought it from the mall. I was skipping through it trying to find a song that I wanted to hear. Kenny came out of the store carrying a bag filled with bottled watermelon drinks. Ma loved those things, but we could only find them at that store for some reason. Kenny passed the bag to me through the driver's side window. He smiled as he said, "I grow up to be a straight-up menace." It was a quote from the song Menace to Society by MC8. It was featured on the Menace to Society soundtrack. I shook my head and thought, now I gotta hear this for the next few weeks. Kenny turned around and started pumping the gas. I was still messing around with the tape player. I wasn't really paying attention, but I saw a guy walking towards Kenny out of the corner of my eye. I didn't think of anything of it. The guy reached the car and asked, "You read, Kenny?" Kenny, in his normal, cool demeanor, said, "I don't know, who's asking?" By that point, I felt like there was something going on that I needed to pay attention to. I turned the radio down so I could hear the conversation. I turned my head to where they were standing, and I saw that the guy had a gun. For some reason, my mind told me to get out of the car. I have no idea why. I walked around to the rear of the car to the driver's side. Kenny, who was never rattled by anything, calmly told me to get back into the car. I heard the words that came out of his mouth, but I couldn't move. That was the one time that I didn't listen to Kenny, but he didn't press the issue. He didn't have time to. Kenny turned to the guy and said, "Look, man, you ain't got to do all this. I'll give you the money. I make money all day. And if you need me to, I'll talk to my homeboy about putting you on so you ain't got to be out here like this. There are all kinds of ways around it." The guy shook his head and said, "This ain't about that." Tony said, "What's up?" And with no further warning, he just started shooting. My feet were planted in place. I couldn't move. I watched as each bullet hit Kenny in the chest. Boom, 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 boom. With each hit, his body jerked forward and backwards. Kenny fell to the ground. It was like my body suddenly woke up. I had no conscious fear of getting shot. I looked the guy straight in the eyes and yelled, "What you do, nigga?" Strangely enough, it was like he couldn't believe he had done it either. He looked scared and confused, like he hadn't set the whole situation in motion. I got down on the ground and started screaming Kenny's name. "Kenny, please don't die. I need you, man. Kenny, please." By that point in time, people had started to gather around. I looked up and realized that the guy with the gun was no longer there. I remember yelling to the top of my lungs, "Somebody please help me, please. Somebody save my brother." I looked down at Kenny, and I could tell that it was too late. His eyes were wide open, but there were no signs of life in them. Those beautiful greenish gray eyes, the ones that had been the object of desire for so many, were completely still and lifeless. The crisp Nautica t-shirt that had been too white for extra butter was saturated with his blood. I sat on the ground and cradled Kenny's head in my lap, screaming and sobbing the entire time. I looked up at a sign that was located in the gas station parking lot. It alternated between displaying a price of gas and the date and time. The sign had been burned in my mind since that moment. It was Wednesday, March 26, 1993. It was 7:26 p.m. That's when Kenny died. I was 15. Kenny was 18. Everything changed on that day. For the first time in my life, I was alone. There was never a point in time where Kenny wasn't in my life. He was my older brother, my best friend, my protector. Kenny was the one who broke everything down to me and taught me about life. He took care of me. Who was going to do that with Kenny gone? Pops? Heck no. I couldn't even trust that nigga to take care of himself. How was he going to take care of me? Kenny's funeral took place 1 week later, on a Wednesday. I saw him one last time, hoping the image would take the place of the one before it, the one where Kenny was on the ground riddled with bullet holes and covered in blood. It didn't. It added a new image of a darker beige Kenny with flat blue lips. A beige Kenny that was wearing a suit. Kenny would have never wore a suit. But that's the last image I'd ever have of my brother. It has been forever burned in my mind and go away, as much as I wish it would. A lot of things from that day won't ever go away. I won't ever forget how Ma stood at Kenny's casket, initially displaying the utmost strength, but something broke inside of her and it never got fixed. Ma yelled in front of his open casket, "Kenny, baby, please get up. Your mama can't do this without you. Please, Kenny, please, baby." I hugged Ma as she crumbled, sliding through my grasp and falling onto the floor. Every time I tried to pick her up, she fell like wet noodles. So I decided to let her stay. I decided that we both should stay. No one said anything until we were ready to get up. We both laid on the floor for about 10 minutes, crying and holding each other. Afterwards, we went to the burial site, and that pretty much played out the same way. Me and Ma laid on the ground at the burial site for about an hour, and when we were done, we went home. We never went back to the church to eat. Neither of us had the strength. When I was at home and alone in my room, I took the time to look at Kenny's obituary. I ran my hand across the picture on the front and wondered what I was going to do without him. I flipped through an entire pamphlet of pictures chronicling 18 years of Kenny's life. 18 years. That's all we had with him. It just didn't seem fair. I felt that life wouldn't ever be the same again, but when I read the obituary, I knew that for sure. It said that Kenny was predeceased by Grandma and Grandpa. His mother was Patricia Matthews, brother Ken Matthews, but Pops wasn't even mentioned. I don't know if that was his decision or Mom's, but it didn't sit well with me. And I knew in that moment that me and Pops, we just could never be the same. So much changed after Kenny died. I was no longer fearful of anything. One thing that I've learned is that fear is about loss. When you fear something, it's because you know you have something to lose. It's like you fear jumping off a cliff because you don't want to lose your life. You fear getting into trouble because you don't want to lose your freedom. I felt like I lost everything when Kenny died. And if I didn't have anything else to lose, then I didn't have anything else to fear. And I didn't care about anything. I was angry. That whole obituary thing played around in my head, and I couldn't let go of the feeling that things could have been different if Pops had been different. This is the thing. Kenny was 2 when Ma and Pops met. He was a baby. In the beginning, he never did a thing other than love Pops. From my very earliest memories, Pops never really accepted Kenny. There was always a sideways jab or a high yellow joke. It was never open, but kids aren't dumb. I noticed that I got treated differently than Kenny, and if I noticed, I know that Kenny did too. He was a lot of things, but he wasn't dumb. But Kenny never made me feel bad about the fact that Pops treated me better. In fact, he always made me feel like we were in something together, and I respected that about him. But Pops, how do you reject a child that just wants to love you and be loved? How do you take 2 kids and make an obvious difference between them? How do you watch a kid grow up and then put them out because you stole from them? And in death, how do you take away the only thing that he ever wanted from you? Acceptance. Pops didn't even give Kenny the respect of acknowledging him as his son on his obituary. I know Kenny was disrespectful, but he was just trying to get his licks back. Everything he did was because he knew that Pops didn't really accept him. Kenny could have scored from anybody. He chose Rob because he knew how Pops felt about him. He flaunted his money and took care of me and Ma because he knew that Pops was broke. He accepted a car from Rob, knowing that Pops didn't even have a car registered in his name. He came home in that car and told Pops that another man told me he couldn't drive it. Kenny wouldn't have done any of that if Pops would have just loved him, as he should have. And on the other side, maybe Kenny wouldn't even have been selling drugs if Pops was half the man that he was supposed to be. The guy that killed Kenny said, Tony said, "What's up?" I didn't know who Tony was at the time, but I felt like Kenny's murder was related to him selling drugs. Like maybe Tony was a rival drug dealer. Either way, Kenny felt like he had to step up, and that's what put him out there. But would he have made that decision if Pops had taken care of the family like he was supposed to? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But for the rest of my life, I lived with the idea that Pops sent him down that road. And with Kenny gone, somebody else had to step up. We had to live. That got decided for me on May 26, 1993 at 7:26 p.m. I was 15. Kenny would forever be paused in time. He was 18. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Please like and follow this podcast, and feel free to share it with family, friends, and frenemies, because all relationships matter, even the toxic ones. Thanks so much for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.